Hello and welcome to Hair in the Hawthorn. You join us on a very special Halloween episode. I've promised that I'd explain that and explain why the headgear. I quickly grabbed my fairy crown. And Neil, would you like to explain the dusty cowboy look?
Well, yeah, that's it. It's dusty cowboy gothic. I used to, in my youth, I used to dress like this all the time with the sort of welder's glasses and the dusty Stetson talcum powder put over it to give it that authentic Western look. Authentic Fields of the Nephilim look. This is what they look like when they go on stage. I should have put the long coat on, long duster jacket as well. But this is as far as I will go for Halloween. This is, we should have been playing some Fields of the Nephilim intro music just to sort of really ramp this up. But
You
here we
do
go.
know that is way beyond our capability of technology to put in any bloody music to start this off. I am super proud of Neil for actually stepping up and doing a little on the Halloween theme because, as you all know, if you regularly watch Hair in the Hawthorn, um, usually Neil opts out of the spooky stuff, but we've decided tonight that we were going to look at the spooky side of the fairies. And there is some real good corker connections, as some of you may know or may not know. I'm going to take this off a minute because I'm not feeling very professional, although the ears
Yeah.
will stay
Well,
on.
yeah. While you do that, this is not going to. I can't see a thing in these glasses with my eyesight. So we're going to have
Will
to
was worried.
adjust while recording.
So Will was worried that he's going to knock his goblet of cider over and end up electrocuting himself with said glasses. There we are.
Oh,
We're
it's back,
back to professional.
back to normal.
But back to professional. So I'm going to kick us off with a little bit of a ghost story. So I go out and I ghost hunt. Some of you may not like that term, some of you may like that term. I'm a ghost hunter, I'm a paranormal investigator. And part of the job that I do as a paranormal investigator, I'm part of an events team, which not dropping any names, but if you want to go and check it out, it's barryguy.com for any future events. Now, we were at the ancient ramming in Wootton under Edge, which is Gloucestershire. Um, about 6 weeks ago now, maybe a little bit longer. And it's a place that we go regularly. It is seen as one of the most haunted properties within the UK. It's seen as one of the most haunted inns within the UK. And there are lots of different theories about why it's haunted. You can look into the history of the ancient Manning if you don't know. And one of the theories is that there is a plague pit underneath the property, and bones and remains have been found under the property. Lots of things have gone off there. Its most famous, I think, stories is about succubus, which plagued one of the owners of the properties, John Humphreys. Because I know him as Rambo, and that yeah, I kind of stalled on his name then. Anyway, we go there quite regularly. Before the events guests turn up, we have the opportunity to investigate the property just as a team, which is really exciting. So we kind of gather maybe an hour and a half before guests start turning up. And it gives us the chance to go around, get baseline assessments of the place, and also do what we love doing, which is trying to contact the dead. Just an average Saturday night. And one of the things that we don't do with guests is sit on Ouija boards, spirit boards. We don't do that with guests. We allow guests to do that. We don't do it because we don't want guests to feel like, that we're rigging the board. But without guests, we're like kids in a candy shop. So we can do board work as a team. And the board that's actually housed within the ancient ramin has never ever failed to produce something. Now, I trust my teammates implicitly, absolutely implicitly. And I won't sit on a table unless I trust the people that I'm sat with. And we'd gone on and the planchette started moving. It was quite a strong connection. And it was sort of zimming around the board, not really answering any of our questions. And we kept asking, who are you? Give us your name. And it spelt out very, very quickly and with some force the word imp. Now, I was sat on the table with Barry Guy, and I'm sure he won't mind me telling you this story. And Barry has encountered a lot of beings naming themselves imps for quite some time now. And he looked at me, and this is the truth. He looked at me and went, "Are you having us on, Kate?" He thought that I was playing about. And I said to him, absolutely not. I sit down with all seriousness with this. I don't see any point in playing around on the board. I don't see the point in doing anything that's going to skew what's being said. It went on to say some other things. In the meantime, as it was spelling out other things we got the regular get out or run or something like that. I felt a cold hand on my leg, and I looked in between myself and the lady sat next to me and saw a shadow, a black shadow. And several other people in the room saw small black shadows moving around. Now, bearing in mind that these are all hardened paranormal investigators. And at one point, somebody said, "I've just seen a shadow move out into the hallway." And we were all sat just discussing what these shadows were, how big they were, where people were seeing them, in quite a calm way, really. And the three people, I think there were three people on the board. We all remained with our fingers on the planchette because we hadn't ended the session. And as we were chatting, the planchette, and this is no word of a lie, shot with such force off the board and hit the wall and clattered on the floor. I screamed. It's not often I get spooked. I screamed. It felt like it had been absolutely yanked out the way. Now, this kind of energy, this kind of behaviour, it does happen at the Ancient Ramin, and I have come across it before going out and investigating, and it feels very impish. I don't like the word imp to project onto an entity or a being, but impish behaviour I do like. It's mischievous to malevolent to the point where you just think, I don't want to deal with this energy anymore. And at that point, I was like, we need to get out and decompress a minute. So that was the start of it. Later on that evening, I had been taking photographs in that room with a group of guests. Are you seeing things?
I thought there was an imp in here, but it's not. It's my cat.
Okay, it's a cat imp. I was taking photographs, and I took one photograph, and I don't analyze the photographs thoroughly until the next day. So I often will look for anomalies within mirrors or within reflections, because for me that's kind of a gateway. You've got that sort of gateway to a liminal space. And in one, there's a mirror in the hallway. You can see this very small, probably about 2.5 foot, dark black being stood in the doorway looking at us into the room. And that was that evening. Now, imps have been on the rise, have been on the rise within the paranormal. For me, I love it. I love that people are starting to accept that the fact that they're not just spirits of the dead haunting, demonics, that there is something other. Now, one of the questions that I often ponder, which will lead us nicely into looking at the folkloric side, is where do fairies sit with the dead? So that's over to you, Neil. Where do fairies sit with the dead? And what do you think of my Ouija board imp incident?
Very interesting. Yeah, no, it's well, as usual with these places, I've never been to the Ram Inn, but I've heard you talk about it, other people talk about it, as well as similar type places where there does seem to be a kind of transitional energy there, whatever you want to call it. And so they're more likely to happen in certain places. I mean, you could put, we'll talk about prehistoric burial sites later on. There's another example of where there's kind of liminality to reality, and you're more likely to experience things that are not normally part of everyday material reality. And that's what that sounds like to me. Spelling out the word imp, especially, that's because it's not a very popular word
Mm,
when people who write, myself included, about fairies will not usually use the term imp. Another one is sprite,
mm,
but ultimately, it, it's a word that is being used to describe a fairy type entity, and the fact that you've put it together with the paranormal ghost hunting is very interesting. And you've written about this for several years now, about the coordination of the two. Um, uh, so let's, as you say, let's bring that back to the folklore, and how can we start to relate that to the folklore, and then we'll move on from
mhm,
that. I should just say to begin with, I did write a piece for the blog site a few years ago. Actually, I looked at it this afternoon just to refresh my memory. I thought, oh, that's a couple of years ago I wrote that. It was 2017. It's
What?
7 years ago. It's, oh my goodness, where has that time gone? We'll talk about the passage of time in another podcast, because it's becoming
Mm,
very, very interesting to me. Something's going on with time
mm,
itself, but that's for another podcast. Um, uh, and in the blog site, it's called Fairies and Death,
mm,
and then I talk about the correlation. So if anyone wants to go to Dead But Dreaming and take a look at that article, it's quite a detailed article, and it's actually the second most viewed article on my blog site, which suggests that the algorithms were picking up the word death, and
mm,
lots of people are very interested in death, and then they find out about how it correlates with the fairies. So there's that, and I'm just going to go. I'll go to that in a moment. But before I do, also the book that came out last year by our good friend Joshua Cutchin, Ecology of Souls, talks extensively about the relationship between fairies and the dead.
mhm.
And anyone who wants to go into a big deep dive onto it, get hold of Ecology of Souls, and you won't be disappointed, because apart from what Joshua is writing, his referencing is great, and you will have 100 books and articles to follow up on if you're really interested in the subject. So I'm going to just go to my to this article, and the first thing from the folklore that I pointed out is it's a great story, and it's called The Fairy Dwelling on Selina Moor, which is Cornwall, and it was collected in the 1870s by a folklorist called William Bottrell. And well, before I go on, let's just give a shout out to the 19th century folklorists who went around and collected these stories, um, from sort of the 1830s right through to the beginning of the 20th century, and we'll come on to the early 20th century in a minute as well. But these folklorists, most of them sort of gentlemen of independent means, who were able to just wander around the countryside, interviewing people and getting the
And
stories from them.
they did this on foot, didn't they? They just sort of used to kind of go into little villages, didn't they? Sit, crash out in little pubs and find
Yeah,
out what who knew in the village what was going off and collate them that way. What a
what a life!
life!
What a life! What a life! William Bottrell actually rode around Cornwall and Devon on a pony, and he talked a little bit about that. And you're thinking, that's absolutely fantastic. It's I want to be reincarnated back in the 19th century as a folklorist of independent means. Obviously, that was because you couldn't do it if you had a job.
No.
Anyway, where are we? Oh, William Bottrell. So one of the stories he collected from Cornwall called Fairy Dwelling on Selena Moor. And it is, go to the blog site, see the story. I sort of set it out in detail there. But the basic summary is that a farmer called Mr. Noy falls asleep one night in a cowshed when he's out on his horse and he can't get home, so he sleeps down in the cowshed, and he finds himself in fairyland.
Mhm.
And I should just say he knocks his head beforehand. That's quite interesting. So he's knocked his head. So there's a potential code for he's altered his state of consciousness.
Mhm.
And he ends up in fairyland, and there are fairies everywhere. Diminutive fairies, most of them male. And the important aspect of the story is that he sees his ex-lover, Grace, who died 3 years previously. And Grace sees him, and she, she manages to scootle him aside from the fairies who are drinking, carousing, and doing the things that fairies often do in these stories. And she tells him that the body that was buried of her was a changeling, and that she, or at least her consciousness, has been taken to fairyland, where unfortunately the fairies are using her basically as a slave. So she's serving the cider, she's having to do all the chores. But basically, the insinuation is that she is a ghost,
Mhm.
and that ghost is within fairyland. And I just want to read out what I mean. It's a much more complex story than that. And I just want to read you out one of the quotes from Grace talking to Mr. Noy, the farmer, while they're in fairyland, and she's describing what it's like. And this is just intriguing. It'll only take a few seconds. Listen to this. So he wants to know what fairies are like and what they're up to. Their mode of life seems somewhat unnatural to her, for all among them is mere illusion or acting and sham. They have no hearts, she believed, and but little sense or feeling. What serves them, in a way, as such, is merely the remembrance of whatever pleased them when they lived as mortals, maybe thousands of years ago. Grace says, for you must remember they are not of our religion, but star worshippers. They don't always live together like Christian turtle doves. Considering their long existence, such constancy would be tiresome for them. That's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, I
Oh,
mean, there's
so
so much to pick apart on that one, isn't there?
I mean that doesn't you don't often get things like that in these 19th century folklore collections. Talking about star worshippers, that's
Mm,
think about that in the 1870s. That was, readers would be saying, what?
mm,
Whereas, of course, now we think, she's speaking in a type of code for pre-Christians
yeah.
or an underground witch cult or
Hmm.
non-Christian cult, and the code is star worshippers.
I
Um,
mean, the other aspect of that could be an alien race.
well,
If you've got star worshippers, I think one of the interesting things, and it's not something that we've got time to cover here, is when we talk about fairies and the dead, or fairies and ghosts, changelings. We have to mention very briefly about changelings, don't we? And about that kind of behavior that goes off within fairyland. That's a motif that's come up, and the fact that you've said that they were described as diminutive as well plays into the other notion of either the fallen, which is a notion that we'll have a look at, or it could be restless souls, which is another thing that we'll have a chat about.
yeah, and it's what I should just say before I move on to something else, which is very similar from the folklore, but it's a lot of people will say, well, this 19th century folklore is just stories to tell around the fire, and there's nothing intrinsic to them. Um, no way. I think that there's two aspects to this. I mean, obviously, it is a story to tell,
Mm,
and there's lots of sort of storytelling tropes and motifs put on
mm,
top of it to make a good story. But at the root of that is something more. So this
mm,
story in particular, it comes across, it's a very long story, and it comes across as though it's based on a testimony of someone.
yes.
And then, whatever, the names are changed, things are overlaid on top of it, but at root, at base, the core of the story is something that has actually happened to
Mm,
someone. And then the other thing is that a lot of these stories will contain coded language, I think,
yeah.
for like the star worshippers, or the fact that Noi has a bang on the head. That just means
Yes.
somehow he's altered his state of consciousness. And when you alter your state of consciousness, you are able to perhaps step into these realms and experience these non-material fairy type entities.
Mm,
So there's that. But so let me go on now to I was talking about the 19th century folklorists. We have so much to owe, we owe so much to them, and kind of the last of those type of collectors was W.Y. Evans Vence,
yes.
in the fairy faith in Celtic countries, and of course that book in his research, and that book done in the early 20th century, just before the First World War. But
Hmm.
in essence, he's a 19th century folklorist.
Yes.
But he went a lot further in terms of his interpretations. I mean, Bottrell and the other 19th century folklorists rarely put an interpretation on these stories. They're
Mm,
just there to record the stories. Whereas W.Y. Evans Vets, because he was writing a doctorate on this, put a whole series of interpretations on the stories that he came across. And so that makes it a little bit of a special book. And it's lots of people investigating the fairies will always go back to W.Y.
mm,
Evans Vence because it's such a great source of material, even if you don't go along with some of his perhaps outdated anthropological interpretations. I know Dr. Simon Young is not so keen on these type of interpretations that he comes across. But and I just want to just quickly read this out. And this is an example of what W.Y. Evans Vence putting his overlay of interpretation on all the stories he's collected. One of the things that's very noticeable in this book is the connection between the fairies and the dead are preeminent in Ireland and Brittany,
yes.
not so much in Scotland, Isle of Man, Wales, and Cornwall. And there's a special resonance in the area of Karnak, where you've
Hmm.
got the standing megalithic stones and burial chambers, and he collects loads of stories where the people basically just correlate the fairies and the dead as the same thing.
Hmm.
And that's and from Ireland as well. There's lots of examples of that. So Evan Spence was talking about that, and it is a nice little quote to just to sum this up. He says, "The animist, you're screwed up. The animistic the animistic character of the Celtic legends of the dead is apparent, and the striking likeness constantly appearing in our evidence between the ordinary apparitional fairies and the ghosts of the dead show that there is often no essential and sometimes no distinguishable difference between these two orders of beings, nor between the world of the dead and fairyland." What do you think of that?
I can't help but hear things like that, and have a notion of some kind of struggle with religion, and that person and these areas struggle with religion. When we talk about Ireland, particularly, that there is this push pull of Catholicism or Christianity and ancient ways that seems to kind of rip things apart and put things back together. So, for instance, if you've got that really heavily laden Christian aspect that's telling you that yeah, we'll fit the fairies in somewhere, and we're going to tell you that they are spirits of the dead, or that they are, fallen angels that have landed in the four quarters, as we know from the elementals. And then you at the heart of communities, there is still that very much a longing for traditional ways where the fairies are almost demigods and are worshipped and live in places where our ancestors dwell. It's kind of part of it, I think, has been kept alive because of that juxtaposition of those two situations, and never more so than in Ireland. Ireland is still very steeped in its tradition, which is kind of opposing Christianity almost, isn't it? The two kind of ends of the spectrum, that somehow they had to come together and make sense of each other for it to coexist within that landscape. Would you say that that's a fair analogy?
Yeah, no, I would. And going back to Evans Vents, this is well over 100 years ago he's writing this.
Yes.
Remember, and for us to get a little bit sniffy about is what we think of as outmoded anthropological interpretations. At the time, that was cutting edge. No one else was talking about that, and we should be grateful to him for just introducing people to this, exactly what we're talking about tonight, the correlation between fairies and the dead. I'm pretty sure, apart from within the actual folklore itself, I don't think anyone else before him was talking about that in any kind of detail. So whatever we need to take that and say, well, okay, but we can take that interpretation further now in light of the evidence and the research that's been done since.
I mean, I don't think it's that outdated when you are looking at places that have held on to Celtic or ancestral traditions at all. I think it's still, what he says stands true within those environments. And it's one of those things that who has the authority to say that, the fairies aren't fallen angels, or fairies aren't our ancestors, or fairies aren't our souls of the restless dead? The evidence has only got to come from those oral histories and from people's experiences, and people connecting. We can't verify this within science at all, whether people are wrong or right within that understanding. I think for me, the one thing that I found interesting, and that I have used my paranormal research for, when I've been in situations where I've come across fairy or fairy-like behaviour within a haunted situation, I have asked questions, and I have been able to ask questions as I would do spirits of the dead. And one of the interesting things that comes out of that for me, there's two things actually that I've asked the question, and it's something that's taken off with other people. How do those entities and energies see us? And it's always the same thing. They see us as light. Now, whether that's come through on a piece of ITC, or whether that's come through on a spirit board, they've always said human beings are seen as light to them. But the other interesting thing is, and I've never ever sort of got to the bottom of why, I've always asked, when I've got contact with a fairy energy or entity or something that's under that guise, can they see and interact with the spirits of the dead? And the answer is always yes. Now, if you ask the spirits of the dead, can they see and interact with fairies? A lot of the time, they haven't got a clue. So, for me, there is some division, but there's also some relationship with this, either the spaces that they live, the frequencies that they're on. We know from folklore and from people's experiences, fairies are tricksters. And can you take anything a fairy says as truth? I think the answer to that's no. So we have to be careful and mindful of that. But they definitely have more of an understanding of the dead than the dead do of them, which I find very, very interesting. Now, if it was that fairies are the restless dead. So it was believed, wasn't it, that our spirits were contained in our body that were much, much smaller than our actual physical body, and that when we died, they left our body at that size. So, 2 foot or whatever it was. I can't remember what the actual size was. And
Well,
people believe,
if you look at the medieval, like in manuscript or
yeah, yeah,
artwork, when the soul is shown as coming out of the body, it is always sort of half or less the size,
yes.
40 to 50% the size of. It's just the way it's depicted.
Yeah, and I find that fascinating that you have to be your soul has to be condensed to fit into your body. It's that yeah, I find that fascinating. So if it is restless spirit, so people have left the body and go, whoa, don't know where I'm going, don't know what I'm doing. That to me is very much attached to Christian ideas of not being able to get to heaven or not wanting to go to heaven, not wanting to move on. So that goes into that bracket. If these beings are the fallen, so they've fallen from heaven, some hit the air, some hit the sea, some hit the earth, some went below the earth, as a theory, then how does that then tie into the spirits of the dead? And why would those things want to be interacting with the spirits of the dead? What did they get out of being with the spirits of the dead, or actually mimicking the spirits of the dead? It puzzles me. It puzzles me why fairies are have an understanding of the dead and have a connection with the dead where the dead don't the other way. You never see a ghost sort of um, coming to people and giving them information about a pixie.
Mm.
But a pixie will tell you that there are spirits of the dead within a property. They will have that interaction. I mean, go on.
I mean, one way around that is that to see the fairies as arbiters between material reality and the collective unconscious, and
Mm-hmm.
the dead. And when we're talking about the dead, we are talking absolutely about pure consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And that pure consciousness is obviously not within space-time reality. It's outside of it in whatever way, however you want to describe that. It is outside of it, but able under certain circumstances to interact with our space-time reality, material reality. And the fairies, as you know, I hate to use popular culture, but the film Photographing Fairies shows this very well. The fairies are part in the dead, the collective unconscious, whatever you want to call it, and partly within material reality. They're able to
Mm-hmm.
move between the two when circumstances are right. And so the reason the dead aren't interested in the fairies because they're just not, they're of no interest to them. They have interest in a bigger collective consciousness. That's what they're part of. And the fairies are simply arbiters between the two. So they are part unconscious dead and they are part material reality, depending on the circumstances and most importantly, depending on the circumstances of the state of consciousness about the human being who is witnessing it and experiencing fairy type entities or the dead. So you see, so what I'm trying to say is that the dead are further away from us.
Mm.
And therefore, these fairy arbiters in the middle ground, well, they don't care about them so much. What have they got to do with anything? Whereas the fairies, if they are arbiters between material and non-material, then they'll be very interested in both us and the consciousnesses of people, maybe animals as well, who've died.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's definitely something in that on a big level. The way I see it is though that there are different kinds of spirits of the dead. That there are different degrees in different states of being and in different states of vibration. So you have very, very ancient spirits, very, very ancient ancestors, maybe even gods and deities that are in one conscious level. I totally get what you're saying. I totally get what you're saying, and I I I think you're right to some degree in that there are, and that for me as a paranormal investigator would be the things that you're talking about. The dead you're talking about are the dead that would come back in visitation, so that they are the pure consciousness, part of the pure consciousness that come back. They're more like the ones that will watch over you, your grandma or your auntie or whatever, near ancestors that would come back and just watch out for you. However, there is a band of hauntings of ghosts, if you like, spirits of the dead, that seem, I call them fractured souls. So they are they're not complete
Sorry, I
in
missed that. That you call them what?
fractured souls.
Okay.
So they're not they don't have the complete consciousness of their life. They don't have the complete connection to death. And I believe that this happens on point of traumatic death or point of death where people believe that they cannot move on into whatever they believe, heaven or whatever. And these are the beings that seem to they become prune-like, if you like. They kind of dry up their reserves of humanity as time goes on. And these are the beings that create difficulties within haunted houses. The more they lose their humanity, the more that they become transfixed on a negative aspect of their life or the negativity of being able to reach God. And in my brief experience with the combination of fairies and these beings, the fairies almost use these beings as an excuse to haunt themselves. And they also love the energy of these beings. They're literally like batteries. So these dead who haven't gone to the collective consciousness, I suppose I will use the word purgatory. They're trapped in this cake layer like purgatory, become really attractive to the darker, more malevolent side of the Fae, and even the mischievous side of the Fae. The dead's consciousness of the Fae is non-existent, almost like we wouldn't be aware if we had a tick on us. If you had a tick on your back, until it dropped off, or until somebody pointed it out, or until you touched it, you wouldn't be aware that it was there. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So this, for me, it's a growing notion of there are different levels and different levels isn't the right word. There are different states of being that the dead are in. And you're right, there are some that they have gone to the nirvana, heaven, aliens, wherever, they've gone home. They've gone home and they can come in visitation, but there are rafts that are kind of trapped. And that for me is where the interest lays. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. And this is something. This is it's a difficult subject to unpick, isn't it? It's not, you're not going to come to some simple, straightforward solution. Oh, well, this is why the dead don't take into account the fairies. Exactly what you're saying, and you're right. Layers isn't the right. Maybe zones of the dead is better description, because they're all interweaving as well. It's not just there. There's like a Venn diagram of where this might be happening, but it's very complex, sophisticated argument you need to make. Interpretation that you need to make to try and come to an understanding of it. But I think we are getting there. When I say we, I mean you, me, and everyone else who's coming down this path at the moment. There's quite a few people who are doing this and looking at ghosts and fairies as coming from the same sort of place. Joshua Cutchin is the first person who comes to mind. And I think we're moving forward with it. I mean, if we'd have been having this conversation 10 years ago, we would just be dismissed out of hand. It's just like nonsense.
Well, we wouldn't have had this conversation. We wouldn't have had this conversation,
no,
would we?
No, exactly. So, and I think it's quite important actually that this is the sort of stuff that I love about looking at the fairies, the fairy phenomenon, because it's opened up all of these areas of research, like paranormal research, UFO research, and it's bringing it together, and I think it is starting to form a better understanding of the reality of what is going on. We're nowhere near there yet. We're perhaps 1% towards coming to the ultimate knowledge, which we probably never get to 100%. But I think it's worth working towards it.
Definitely. I mean, for me, that interest is definitely strong, and especially in areas such as with poltergeist activity. I mean, Joshua Cutchins and as well as Richard Sugg talk about that, about how is poltergeist activity actually fairy activity. I like to believe that the fairies will just jump on the back of anything, and if it's going to get blamed on somebody else, then they'll do it. So, that historically we know that they do things like they will take objects or leave objects, or they'll open and close doors, or they'll plait people's hair in the night, or we know that they will even scratch and bite people. This is all kind of stuff that we've attributed to poltergeist. I mean, what is poltergeist? It's I mean, that's another massive question, because people haven't been able to put a finger on what poltergeist is, other than the fact that it's the German means noisy ghost or noisy spirit. Nobody's actually said it's the spirits of the dead. Nobody's actually pinned that down and said it's the spirits of the dead. Nobody's actually pinned it down and said, oh, it's demonic. It's almost like poltergeist is it's not a noun, it's not a name for something, it's an activity. It's something that happens. Like imp for me is not a name so much as it is a personality trait. I when we've been talking, I get this sense that the whole fairy world is going, oh God. Yeah. Just like, what are they banging on about? Yeah,
no, they know what we're like by now. They're probably just taking it totally for granted. Oh, here they go again. It's Kate Neal
here they
talking
go
about
with the
ghosts and fairies. But well, okay, let's ground this a little bit more in some
let's bring it back a bit.
In some folklore, or well, actually folklore stroke archaeology, because I've mentioned many times before, I'm not going to be able to get the book, but I've shown it so many times, called The Folklore of Prehistoric Sites in Britain by the archaeologist Leslie Grinsell, which was written in 1976. And great inspiration for me. That really got me on the road to looking into the folklore and how it relates to the archaeology. And again, sorry for repeating myself from previous broadcasts, but it's worth reiterating that when he collected the stories of specifically the fairies at prehistoric sites, even producing a distribution map. All archaeologists have to have a distribution map or two in their publications. And I think it's about 60 sites, mostly Scotland and then down the west and to the southwest of England, not many in the east of England, which relate fairy folklore to prehistoric sites, primarily Bronze Age round barrows, but not exclusively. There are other sites. And so for instance, I'm going to come down on the fairies side here, because you've just been saying out what a mischievous bunch they are. But there's one lovely story from Stugurzy. Oh, sorry if that's mispronunciation. It's a place in Somerset where there's a Bronze Age round barrow, and it's a beautiful story from the 1880s, I believe, where a farmhand was walking to work one day, and on the Bronze Age burial mound, he finds a broken shovel, and he stops and he mends it and puts it back where he found it. Goes off to work. When he comes back from work, there's a lovely the shovel's gone, and there's a lovely baked cake waiting for him on the Bronze Age burial mound. So there's an example. The fairies aren't always poking your eyes out and and causing all sorts of mischief.
Would you eat that cake though? I wouldn't eat that bloody cake. I'd be like, we know about fairy food.
The story doesn't relate whether he actually ate it or not, or what happened to him. But there's just one example of the folklore connecting to an archaeological prehistoric site. There's another one, a very famous story from the 12th century, one of the earliest, from the chronicler called William de Newborough, and who was incidentally one of the chroniclers who talked about the Green Children.
Oh, yeah.
He was one of the people who promoted that story, but he also tells a story. Actually, these medieval chroniclers are great. One minute they're talking about, you know, a battle and people hacking each other to pieces, and it's all kind of, oh my goodness. And then the next they're off into fairy folklore as in exactly the same tone. You know, it's as though there's no difference between a big medieval battle and the stories they're telling. And one of the ones he tells is from, it's actually a very late Neolithic burial mound, so it's a round barrow, but Neolithic. So you would usually think whatever, late Neolithic, early Bronze Age. We're talking about 2000 BC, and it's a big one, and no tittering at the back, but it's called Willie Howe, and and the story is that a drunken horseman passes by it one night, hears revelry inside of the mound, goes around the mound, there's a door into the mound, and there's light coming out, so he gets off his horse and goes in, and he knows his fairy folklore, obviously, because he's off, the fairies are in there having a revel, and he's offered a silver cup, probably much like
Just
this
like
one,
that.
to drink from, but he knows better than to drink from it, so he takes the cup, throws the liquid out, and does a getaway on his horse. And the tradition is that this cup eventually ended up with King Henry II, and was kept in the Tower of London. Whether it's still there, who knows? So it's a really interesting story, and just typical of how the fairies will be related or correlated to prehistoric. And let's get back to the fairies and the dead. It's usually, not exclusively, but almost always burial sites.
Yes.
So the you know, and usually Bronze Age round barrows, although, you know, people will know my tale with West Kennet long barrow, so it goes back further than that. And there are other folklore stories, fairy phenomenon stories associated with Neolithic as well as Bronze Age barrows. There tends not to be so much after that, from the Iron Age or afterwards. It's these specific prehistoric burial sites that have dozens, probably hundreds of stories of fairy encounters attached to them. And I don't think that's an accident. Evans Vents was also talking about it. I mentioned earlier the Karnak site in Brittany, where, you know, there are so many fairy stories. Why that they are intimately connected with the dead, despite what we've just been saying. There is undoubtedly that connection with them, and I find it intriguing that it especially seems to resonate with prehistoric monuments. And we've talked about this before with Thomas Sheridan about why there is that connection apart from with the dead. I mean, you don't tend to get fairies in cemeteries, so why are they connecting themselves to prehistoric burial sites? And I think that our prehistoric ancestors, especially of the Neolithic and early Bronze Age, were self-evidently more connected with the land and the spirit of the land, and everything that went within that non-material aspect of the landscape, which is why they built these monuments where they did. And if that's the case, they were probably interacting, I think, speculation obviously, but I think they were interacting with the dead, fairy type entities, non-material entities, what they would have maybe thought of as gods and goddesses, which then they've attached to those sites. And if that's happened over a long period of time, that mental attachment or spiritual attachment to those sites there will be a residue of that through time, even to the time when 19th and 20th century folklorists were collecting these stories. There are still fairy encounter type stories attached to these, what are ostensibly burial mounds of the dead.
I mean, you've in its very, very essence, though, there is that whole, you go up to one of these sites and there is often a prominent doorway that goes underground. So
Yes.
we associate the dead with the underground, even if it is just interning the dead to the underground on that very, very base layer, not even talking about religion or what religious beliefs are about what is under the ground. There's a Christian belief of it being hell, but that wasn't held by pre-Christians. It was where the dead went, isn't it? It was underground. And we have many traditional folk tales that will tell of the fairies living underground, going into these hills or these mounds to seek refuge. And like you say, if they were interning the dead, and we know these sites, we know little about these sites really, but what we do know is they weren't there for multiple burials, as in whole villages. So it wasn't just everybody who was placed in these chambers. It was specific people. So it seems that there was a reverence for these people, and there was they were seen high enough within a community to be there. Is it that people went there to talk to the ancestors to gain knowledge from them, and that in turn turned into sort of they're going to go and talk to demigods, and that in turn turned to the demigods turned into fairies or spirits of nature in the land as things became more complex in thinking and understanding. So it went out from just a place where you talk to your relatives to talking to smaller gods, to talking because if you think about the complexities of going from hunter-gatherer into farming, where the worship of demigods would have been, we worship the god of the hunt, and then you go into farming and you've got things like, you've got to bless your animals and your plough and your hearth and your home and your fields and the hedgerows and everything. So things start picking apart, don't they, into lots of little demigods that would have been worshipped at the time. Did that then span out or kind of bleed out into being fairies?
Yes, I think that's right, and that's like I said when I say the residue of whatever our Neolithic and Bronze Age ancestors believed in, uh, that has bled through time,
Mm,
and in some ways become massively distilled. Obviously,
mm,
I mean, someone passing by a round barrow and seeing a fairy, and well, that's it. That is probably much diluted from the
mm,
experience that they were having, um, with what they would, you know, who knows what they would have seen the ancestors as, but certainly sort of demigods at some level. I doubt whether a Bronze Age person would have recognized a fairy as the way we recognize a fairy. They're
mm,
much more likely to see it as a god or an ancestor.
mm,
And again, there you get, but whatever, it's the dead. There's a functionality, interrelation between those ancestors, what they were doing, and the dead. It's absolutely essential. Whereas in our secular society, for the
mm,
last few hundred years, especially in the 20th and 20th century, we've lost that connection, or
mm.
most people have
Yes.
lost that connection. And so when you come face to face with it in whatever form, it can be quite shocking. It was for
Mm,
for me, encounter with a fairy type entity in the Neolithic West Kennet Long Barrow. It's quite a shocker. It's completely changed my life, because I
mm.
suddenly realised whatever this entity was, it was real and it was
Yes.
interacting with me, but it's not part of material reality. It's recognised
Mhm.
within no scientific paradigm. And as soon as you realise that, it's boom. Sorry, that's back to my personal experience. And we've got
No, no, no. I think it's really interesting that your first experience, very first experience, was at West Kennet. My first experience was at Wayland Smithy,
yeah,
was just outside of
much,
Wayland
much,
Smithy.
much the same date,
Yeah,
both of them. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy, isn't it? I don't think we can kind of leave the subject without touching on um, the Banshee. And I only very briefly, oh dear, you got cramp.
I have.
Just as I said banshee. Nah,
Yeah.
nah.
This is
um,
I'm sorry, this is the last broadcast, everyone. The banshee is screaming outside my window.
That's just reminding me of something. I had grandparents on the borders of Scotland, and I'll just very briefly tell you this that I didn't really understand the terror that the night could bring. That was the borders of Scotland as a preteen, sort of 11 years old. The nights were darker than dark, and when the house lights went out, there was no ambient light from anywhere if there was no moon. And I remember being woken up in the middle of the night to what I can only describe as a banshee. I've never heard anything like it in my life. And it turned out to be a fox. And I'd heard foxes
Fox,
before,
yeah.
but this thing was otherworldly. It's quite sad, really, because her cubs had been killed, basically, and she was wandering the moors screaming. And I did. That to me is the sound of the banshee, and it chills me. I don't want to go too much into the banshee, just because my particular I've got a lot of um, like my brain tonight, honestly. So people who know about Irish fairy culture, for me, it's very much out of my quarter. And I don't want to talk too much about it, but I do want to talk about it very, very briefly because we have to bring it into this. So the banshee, when I go out and I talk to people in the paranormal community about it, and I say, "What is the banshee?" And most people say, "Oh, it's a spirit or a spectre that usually brings death with her," which isn't true. So we know the banshee is a fairy, and she's from Irish mythology. And I've just found out today. I was just watching something on, and I can't even remember who it was. I'll tell you what, my brain's addled. He was saying, this guy was saying that, and I don't know whether this is true or not, so I'm so sure somebody will pull me up. But the banshee would only attach itself to specifically purely Irish families. And it would almost be a badge of how Irish you were if you had a banshee attached to your family. And she would come and she would foretell of a death of a family. She would wail in mourning for the forthcoming death. Sometimes she was seen as beautiful, sometimes she was seen as an old hag. And I will find out the guy's name who was talking about it, but he also said that people who were Anglo Irish would try and prove their Irishness by attaching banshee stories to their family.
Right, yeah, I've heard this, yeah.
Have you?
Yeah.
I just thought that was genius. It's how Irish are you? Well,
Yeah.
I've got a banshee. It's brilliant, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
brilliant.
I should just
So
say that if you, I mean, David Halpin from Circle Stories, good friend
I've
of the
got a lot of
channel.
respect for those. That's what I want. That's the word I was looking for. I've got a lot of respect for people who safeguard the Irish tradition
Yeah,
and understand the Irish traditions.
that's
That's
right.
what I want to say.
But they you go search through Circle Stories, and you will find David's written a few articles, very good articles about banshees, what they
Yeah.
are, what they're not, and I think he tells that story about trying to attack fake attachments of a banshee. Oh no, we've definitely got banshee, even though we're half English. But
Yeah.
yeah. So I know we're nearly out of time. I mean, this subject could go on. We probably might do another one and sort of hone in a little bit closer
On
on some of
specifics.
those specifics, because we've done. I mean, this is just a sort of summary, really,
Mm. It's
of
not even a summary, is it? It's just a snapshot.
yes. But just one other aspect of the fairies and death is that apparently, according to the folklore, fairies do die because
Oh.
and now there's another question: what do they become when they die? Fairy ghosts, do they go somewhere? That's all right. That's too much of a big one. But I just want to quickly point out: if you go to my article on it, you'll see there's a section on fairy funerals, and very famously, William Blake describes seeing a fairy funeral where the dead fairy is being carried on a leaf of a rose leaf. A beautiful description. William Blake is absolutely brilliant. But there's just we won't go into it now. I'm not going to even summarize this story, but the wonderfully titled collection by the folklorist James Bowker, published in 1883, and it is called Goblin Tales of Lancashire.
It's called what again? Sorry, I actually just heard that because it went a bit weird as Bodlin Tales.
Goblin Tales of Lancashire. And he tells a very, and this relates to the Banshee in a little bit, in a small way, because basically two fellas see a fairy funeral, and the fairy who is on the pyre, who is the dead fairy, one bloke turns to the other and says, "He's a spitting image of you." And of course, the guy's like, "Oh my God, he is, isn't he?" And they step out to stop the funeral, and it vanishes. And then, of course, a few weeks
He
later,
drops down dead.
the guy falls off a hayrick and breaks his neck. So that's another long story. Go on to Debit Dreaming. You'll see that in a full rundown. Or even better, go and get Goblin Tales of Lancashire from
Goblin Tales of Lancashire
from the Internet Archive, where you will find it. It's full of really good stories. That one. It's but as I say, again, what's that? 1880s. Another folklorist going out and collecting these stories, which if they hadn't have done it, we would have had none of this material.
we should buy
nothing about
we
it.
should buy we're going to buy ourselves ponies, Neil, and a cart, and a proper Edwardian Victorian kind of regalia, and I think we should go round all the country pubs, and see if we can get a free ale and sit and chat with people. That's our future job.
That could end in disaster, but I kind of like the sound of it. Yeah.
I think to wrap this up, there's a couple of things. I think moving forward, we definitely need to. One of the things that I wanted to talk about, and we've nowhere near enough time, is where the wild hunt fits in with fairies and the dead. That's something that I want to explore. I also want to explore, and it's something that's been bothering me for a while, because I have the kind of growing belief that incubus and succubus live within the fairy realm. I don't believe that they're within the demonic realm at all. And I would love to know if anybody else has kind of come across any research onto that, because they do predate Christianity. So we are Samhain. We are the start of the liminal period of time. We are the start of the season of the dead. And it is the eve, well, it will be when this goes out, the eve of the Samhain period of time, which takes place over the whole of November. So a word of warning to you all: if you come across a fairy, the time is not now to take fairy food. The time is not now to dance with the fairies. In fact, if you see one, run in the opposite direction, like your life depends on it. And I tell you why. I heard a theory the other day, which I really like this theory. I always traditionally put on my very first fire of the year on Halloween. And I've done it automatically, not really understanding why, but I've always said the fire doesn't go on until Halloween. And I heard a lady talk the other day, a pagan lady, saying that people would light fires on Halloween to indicate to each other that they were going to be kind to each other over the period of time of this period of time of death. And the theory is that Mother Earth is now having her rest. She's going to bed. So all the plants are dying, everything's going back to the ground. And while the Mother Earth is away, she asks us to make a promise that we are going to be good to each other through the leaner months. Basically, don't fight, don't kill each other, don't maim, or whatever you. And I really like that. I really like that, that we're all going to strike a fire of some kind, even if it's just a candle this evening, just to say, you know what, we're not going to bitch about each other. We're all going to get on, because it's all a dark time for all of us. But most of all, stay away from the fairies. Any last words of wisdom, Neil?
No, none at all. I think we've done everything. I'll just give you one.
Oh yes,
Oh,
shall I put mine on?
I can't put it on because I've got my headphones on. I'll just
Just rest it on, because this is the only time when you will see Neil in any kind of regalia. There you go.
What's that?
Yeah,
I can't
that's
put
good, especially with the swooshing hair as well. That's almost a suede thing going off there.
Yeah, I can't put the glasses on. That's too much of an effort.
I'm sure everybody appreciates your effort, and one of these days we'll get you to a fairy ball.
Yeah, we'll
One
see
of
about
these
that.
days.
We'll see about that.
So I think that's going to wrap us up, and we've left with lots of tantalising things that we're going to talk about in the future. Have got future guests coming up. We've got to get our act together and get a diary sorted for some future guests. So keep an eye out for future Hair in the Hawthorn, and thank you so much for watching.
Cheers.